Hello ladies and gents, boys and girls, my name is Jack. Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to the garage. Thank you to everybody who subscribed within the last week since the last video last Wednesday. Our numbers grow every single day and it's really great to see the channel blossoming. What are we up to today? Well, my bread and butter, my career is as an airline pilot. I fly jet airliners all over Europe, all over the north of Africa, a little bit of the Middle East and most Western Asia as well. And I think that there's a few principles and concepts that we use in aviation that improve safety in aviation that are very transferable across to riding motorcycles on the road. And I try and adopt these principles when I go out on the road. I think it might be really good if you listen to this and watch this. Maybe a few of these principles might stick and possibly even improve your safety on the road as well. So let me just get changed and I'll see you out on the road right after this.
Well everyone, if only getting leathers on was that easy. So we're coming down from the house and there she is. That's what we're riding today. Again, Ninja H2 2019 Carbon Edition. Absolutely beautiful bike. I think you'll probably agree. Now, as a pilot, you'd never leave the house without all of your stuff. Things you would take is your flight bags, night stock kit, your headset, all these sorts of things. And riding safely is no different. So I'm in full gear, as you can see, head to toe, in Dainese airbag stuff. You don't have to go this crazy. I very rarely go this crazy with my gear. Much prefer to be a lot more dressed down. But I use, when I do that, base layers. So Kevlar base layers, and on top of that, a lot of CE padding as well for absorption if you were to come off. So first things first, bring all your gear, all your safety gear. You cannot underestimate the importance of it. Now, when you get to work as a pilot, turn up to your aircraft. The second you see your aircraft, you walk over to it and you're checking it all out and you're making sure that nothing is visually different to what you would expect. So I'm walking around, say this is the aircraft, walking around and performing something called a walk around. So we're just visually checking that everything is where it should be, nothing is obviously wrong, no bolts loose, no panels hanging off, nothing has changed since the last time the aircraft, or in this case the bike, was operated. First impressions, all looks pretty good. Then, good thing to do, switch it on. Not the engine, just the electrics. And again, you want to check that everything's working. So we check the brake by putting our light hand behind, checking that our brake lights work. We're also going to take it off the stand slightly, and we got some brake pressure there as well. Also check that this is compressing so that there's no issues with the suspension. We'd also check our tyre pressures, so front and rear, and our brake fluid levels. So we've got our reservoirs up here, also got oil levels down here, and just make sure that everything is as we expect it to be, because the very last thing that we want is for an issue to occur once we're riding that we could have taken care of before we even got going. So that's the first thing that we would do. I suppose the second thing after all the gear is do a really good walk around and make sure that everything is absolutely as it should be. Okay, so what next once you've had a look at your aircraft? Well, You're going to look at your flight plans. Flight plans are extremely important documents. They tell us what is filed with air traffic control, so our routing, and they also tell us as pilots, more importantly for us I think, is some of the threats that we can potentially encounter at the departure airport, en route, and at our destination as well, at the destination airport. It does this by giving us very detailed breakdowns of the weather. So we get the current and the forecast weather at the departure airport, the destination airports, and our alternate airports. And it also gives us en route weather as well. So if there's particular areas that are very built up in terms of clouds, thunderstorms, very convective activity, they'll tell us all about those as well. Really important to know, because as a pilot we want to know all about the threats that we might face on any given day, so that we can mitigate against them. And that leads me on to the next thing that I'm going to talk about, which is something called threat and error management. Now, this is a huge concept in aviation, threat and error management, and it's what I think really underpins the whole safety culture in aviation. And it's about identifying as a crew, and of course when you're on your motorbike on your own, you're not in a crew, so it's all on you. But it's about identifying as a crew the possible threats to the operation, to the aircraft, to your passengers and crew, everything that you've got responsibility for that you could face at any given time. Now, the way we mitigate against these threats is by doing very detailed briefs. So briefing is extremely important. We'd work with each other, the captain and the first officer, to come up with a plan as to how we're going to circumnavigate or circumvent certain threats, how we're going to deal with them, and more importantly, to help us identify them. Of course, you don't have a first officer to do a briefing with, you're all on your own. But you can still be thinking about these threats from the moment that you get up if you intend to ride on any given day. For example, today we've got an absolutely beautiful day. There's not a single cloud in the sky. Gorgeous. It's probably the first day that I've done a sunny video on the channel. But that could be significantly different. The last time I did a ride out video, it was extremely cold. It was very wet. There was residual ice that had remained on the roads from the preceding day. And on that day, when I woke up, I had to make a decision as to whether or not these threats could be navigated, and whether it was worth taking the motorbike out at all, which is alluding to something that we're going to talk about very soon. Today, no particular threats, apart from one, is that I haven't actually done a lot of riding lately. So in aviation we call it currency. I'm not very current in aviation terms, so I am aware of that. I've briefed myself on that, and my mitigation for it, or my management of it, is that I'm going to take everything a little bit slower, and my normal thresholds of safety, I'm not going to get close to them. I'm going to add an additional layer, an additional margin of error onto those. So that is effectively it in a nutshell, threat and error management. Well, that's the threat side anyway. So threats, slippery roads rather. Well, what am I going to do? Maybe I'm going to lean a little bit on the electronics in the bike as a mitigation, as a management of that threat. So I may use a little bit more traction control, a higher traction control setting. I may use the rain mode. And again, we're going to get onto a little bit more of this kind of stuff in a minute. Errors. So threats are external factors that we can't control. Things like the weather, things like other road users, for example. Errors are things that we could potentially do ourselves. Perhaps an error might be the threat of mishandling the bike, in which case, as I say, I've mitigated against that by taking things a little bit slower because I haven't done a lot of riding. You don't have to sit there and do some massive, long, drawn-out process, but it's just about being self-aware. It's about having some awareness of your surroundings, awareness of the conditions, and trying to think of one or two things that you can factor into your riding that will just make the process a little bit better, a little bit safer for you. Let me start up the bike. We'll get on the roll, and I'll start talking to you about the next thing, which is how we try and deal with some of these things that we face on a daily basis once they actually present themselves to us. So here we go, fire up the Ninja. Found a nice little car park, which is reasonably quiet. Certainly a lot more quiet than outside the house, that's for sure. A minute ago I had to move to a new location for that little section because they're building some more houses down my road, and my road's effectively the only access for it for all the lorries and things, which is less than ideal. Okay, so anyway, we digress. Threats can affect the way that we feel. When they do present themselves to us, or when they don't. So when they don't, we're in the green, aren't we? We're just going about our day. We're very relaxed. We have lots of situational awareness. We're not feeling rushed, and we're not feeling in danger. And that's where we want to stay. I mean, a certain level of stress is good for us, because a certain level of stress, or an optimal amount of stress, heightens our ability to deal with issues when they arise. If we're too much in the green, it could be argued, come on, it could be argued that we won't be very spring-loaded to deal with an issue when it presents itself. Let's get round this one. There we go. Oh, straight out. A threat. People not looking as they come out of junctions. Big threat for motorbikers. So okay, that's the green. That's where we want to be, but with a certain level of stress, so we're not too blasé. Then there's the amber. So this is when a situation starts to unfold, and it heightens our level of alertness, and we start to feel a little bit uneasy. We can see something happening before our eyes, and we're starting to have to deal with an unfolding eventuality. Now, in an aircraft, that might be a master warning or caution, but on the roads, it could be a tailgater or something like that. Someone who's getting a little bit too close for comfort behind us, and we're feeling the need to push on and go a little bit faster than we ought to be going, pushing us outside of our comfort zone. Then we have the red, which is where you're well and truly embroiled in a situation, and it seems like there's very little time to deal with it before the situation is too out of control and you end up having an accident. Now, good mitigation technique for going into the amber, and particularly for going into the red, is a little acronym that we use called ATM, which stands for avoid, trap, and mitigate. So of course the best prevention for any threat or error is to avoid it entirely. If we avoid it entirely, then it's absolutely 100% not an issue. Now, the way we might avoid a threat entirely, if we go back to our tailgater, is just pull over. Don't get involved in it, which is easier said than done, especially if you've got a powerful machine like this, which can make quick work of anybody who's too close to you. Any indication? No? You might feel the need to give it a flick of the wrist. And leave them in your dust. But if you were just to avoid it entirely, pull over, stop by the side of the road, let the idiot go through, well, that issue isn't going to get any worse. And suddenly you're all the way back into the green, your capacity increases, and as your capacity increases, your situational awareness increases, and we're feeling much better immediately. So let's say we don't avoid that situation. We then have to trap it in some way, because if we don't trap it, it has the potential to put us further into the traffic light system, further into the red. Now, how might we trap this situation that's unfolding? Well, you might decide that you're being pushed along, or feeling the need to go a little bit too fast. You're starting to push your margins of safety, your comfort levels. Well, it can be as simple as just slowing down. Slow everything down. They're not going to go into the back of you. And just bring things back into the green from the amber. He loved it. Pull yourself back into the green. Before you get pushed into the red. As you can see, if you're in the green and you're at the avoid stage and you manage to avoid, you've got so much time to deal with the issue. If you allow yourself to drift into the amber, you then have to trap the problem. And time reduces. Time to deal with it reduces because you're embroiled in the situation. And that's not a good place to be. But if you really let things get away from you, you end up in the red, and that's where you have to do M, which is mitigate. Now if you find yourself having to mitigate, you're in a pretty bad place. You've got very little time to deal with it. Yeah. Thank you. You've got very little time to deal with the issue, and the stakes are much higher. You're in the red, panic is starting to set in, because you're pushing yourself, in our example, you're pushing yourself beyond your limits. The situation is starting to get a little bit out of control. And it's when we're in the red that accidents happen. So what we really want to do, if we can, is avoid the red at all costs. I would almost say that green and amber are your normal ranges. But if you're in the amber, pull yourself back to the green. But whatever you do, try and use avoid and trap before you have to use mitigate. I'll say that's it for the actual road riding element of it, but sometimes the problems that we face aren't always so clear in aviation, and they need a lot more thinking to figure them out and to select an appropriate course of action in order to retrieve a given situation. Now for this we use a process, another acronym. Aviation loves its acronyms. Another process called DODAR. There are various or different variations of this, but DODAR is one that we use at my airline. And it's a decision-making process that's based on getting to the root cause of your problem. So DODAR stands for diagnose. You can't deal with a problem if you haven't diagnosed the problem. Because what problem are you dealing with? You might deal with a different problem if you've incorrectly diagnosed it. So diagnosis is absolutely key. Otherwise, the rest of the process is all a bit academic. You start to deal with things that you're not actually facing. The O is for options. So once you've diagnosed the problem, you then have to generate some options. And then once you've generated a number of options, you then move on to deciding upon an option. A refers to acting upon your decision and assigning tasks. Well, it's a double A really. And then R is the all-important review. Have we done everything right? So when might we use DODAR? When we're out and about on our bikes? Well, DODAR would be after we've faced a problem. Perhaps our engine has failed. We get engine failures on airliners, very rarely, but we do. One has been in the media very recently. I've had to drift off to the left, in the UK anyway, drift off to the left and find the hard shoulder. But of course, an engine failure doesn't wait for you to be in a place that's entirely safe. There may be no hard shoulder. You may find that there's just the edge of the road, the verge. We'd have to, in that case, very quickly diagnose what we've had. Can we restart the bike again? Did we hear a loud bang? Did everything break? If it did, no, we can't restart. So what are our options? Well, our options are to vacate the road, clearly, or stay on the road. Which of those two are we going to do? That can even be looked into even further, in that you might ask yourself, well, where am I going to position myself? Am I going to position myself just the other side of the barriers, or am I going to position myself up the hill nice and clear? Of any other threats that may be associated with sitting idly by the side of the road. Then we decide on an option. And the only point of deciding on an option, if you've generated a few options, and you're only going to generate the best option if you've come up with a little choice to select from. Then we act on it, so we just get on with it and do whatever we've decided. And then once we're clear, we do our review. So once we put ourselves in a safe position, we secured the bike, we secured ourselves, we have a think about what just happened. Did we diagnose the issue correctly? Did we generate the right options? Are there any other options that we can generate? Did we decide on the right option? And do we need to act again in terms of running another DODAR to put ourselves in an even better position with the benefits of hindsight?
Well everyone, that's all we've got time for on that, but I hope you found it interesting. On a scale of very uninteresting, very unuseful to very useful, hopefully you found it a little bit over halfway, maybe even in the top 3/4, who knows. But if you can take one thing from it and it makes your riding safer, then I've done my job for today. Thank you for watching today. Really appreciate your support on the channel. Do remember to click a like if you liked it. If you want to talk about it, put a comment down below. I will come back to you. And if you could subscribe to the channel, that would be great. We're a brand spanking new channel, trying to grow it. It's got a release every single Wednesday, so we'd love to have you on board. Until next time, stay safe, ride safe, and I look forward to seeing you back here in the garage again for another episode of the Bike Channel. Thank you. Bye-bye.